My name is Felicia Grant Preston, and I consider my work mixed medium because I am always doing a lot of experimental things with my work. I started off as a kid drawing, and so I did a lot of representational work from the time I was in elementary school through college. However, I realized at some point that what I really loved was working with color, texture and color. And however, every now and then I will go back to some representational work. And most often that has to do with either a theme for a show. Sometimes when I'm listening to somebody else's theme or I'm thinking about somebody else's theme, I tend to see it representationally as opposed to when I'm just doing my own work. Every now and then, if something moves me in a particular way at the heart level, I will tend to create something, and sometimes it is representational and sometimes not. I have always seen myself as a vessel by which this artistic energy comes through. And because of that, I allow that process to work. That became a problem for me at some point because people would look at my work, well, you're always doing different things, sometimes you come out and you have this and that. But for me, I don't look at it and criticize it that way because it wasn't what I did the last time. I just allow the energy to work. And sometimes that happens in, very mysterious ways. It could be, for instance, I've worked with some things that have been in my basement since the former owners were there. And something just said, pick this up, use this. And I just go with the flow. And all the information may not come at the same time. It may come in gradual stages. So I've learned to allow that to happen rather than trying to force my way and make something happen. So I'm always working on multiple pieces at the same time because sometimes I may start working on a piece and I think I'm going into the studio to work on a certain piece and something says, do this, put that there. And I just follow that creative energy instead of trying to dictate where it's supposed to go. Sapphire and Crystals actually was the title of a show. Marva and I were a part of another group called Mud Peoples. And at the time Mud Peoples began, there were, I think I was the sixth member out of six to join the group. And actually Marva made me decide, well, Marva made me justify my inclusion in the group because all of the members of the group did clay, which they referred to as mud. So I was brought in by two other members, but Marva said, well, she's a painter. We don't, we're all clay people. But what ended up happening at the time, I was working on, and that's still something that I do, working with plaster. And I would use the plaster to create heavy textures. And one day, Marva heard some guys who were plasterers, and they were referred to the plaster as mud. And so she said, oh, okay, well, that'll work. So I became a formal member of the group. At that time, there were six of us, and then we were down to four of us. And then one day, Marva and I went to a meeting, and the other two members decided that they were no longer going to be a part of the group. And I think they thought the group was going to disband because there was just Marva and I left. So it was a cold winter day. We just left those members' house, and we would sit in the car and talk a little bit before we, drove off. And I'd get in my car, she'd get in her car. But she said, do you want to let this go? And I'm like, no, it's working for me. So we decided to stay. So we began to have what we called our kitchen table meetings, where we would sit and talk about what our dreams were, what we wanted to do. Now, Marva was ahead of me. She was older, had been out here as an artist for some time, and I was new. I was fresh out of grad school, got married right after grad school, had my second baby, and I was doing a lot of mothering. And we would we would meet on the weekends. My husband would keep, the kids, and we would meet on the weekends and talk about our dreams. And Marva said at one point that she wanted to do a women's show. And at the time, I was the arts and letters chairman of my sorority. And, I said, well, this is a good time to do it because then, I have a little backup here. I've got a little budget I can work with, and we can do this. So we started sitting down making plans. And Marva, of course, being the senior member of the group, had a lot more women artists that she knew. Let me backtrack for a second and say something, just regarding a little history. All through undergrad and grad school, they didn't talk about African American artists at all. So I had no idea who African American artists were. I had started doing art fairs and met some African American women along the way. But of course, the bulk of the women that we included in the first show were artists that Marva had known. Not knowing anything about African American artists. When I go back to even grad school, I worked in the slide library where professors came in to prepare their lectures. And so I had to file slides, mount new slides and things like that. And of course I was taking classes. So I was never encountering African American artists in terms of lectures or anything like that. The most that I found was a list of African American artists, and it was listed as minor arts. So I sat down and I just wrote down the names because I wanted to be familiar with African American artists. So to be a part of a group of women, professional women, and I learned so much along the way. I learned so much from Marva. I learned so much from the women who came on board because, like I said, it did not become a collective right away. It's because you may start off with a vision and you can only see so much of that vision, and then people come on board and they expand that vision and it becomes something new, something better, something greater. And that's what happened with Sapphire and Crystals. We even looked at different names that we wanted to call the show because that was just the show. And the first one in 1987 was right here in the Southside Community Arts Center. But as more people came on and it grew, the name grew and it became not just Sapphire and Crystals, the exhibition, but Sapphire and Crystals, the group. Sapphire and Crystals is important because it is one way of identifying female artists, African American artists, and it is a way for us to allow ourselves to be known out there in the greater community. Marva and I were very much into all things spiritual. I was doing a lot of very spiritual reading. Marva was doing a lot of spiritual reading, and we talked a lot about how we saw that as a part of this exhibition. And we talked about stones and how spiritual stones were and just different things spiritual. And we came up with a list of different things, and a lot of them had to do with stones, and gems. We were almost sapphire and diamonds, but sapphire and crystals had a different kind of ring to it. It just seemed to fit, but we went through a short list of names, and that's what became Sapphire and Crystals. My contributions to the altar were my husband. I have a photograph of him there because he was the wind beneath my wings. I could never have done this without his backing. As a working mother, educator, my time was very limited. Also, I have Marva, a picture of Marva, I think from her 8th grade graduation. That's one of the pictures I have up there. And I also do printmaking from time to time. So my prints of Venus Blue and Renee Townsend are also a part of that altar. It's the Literary Impulse. It was held at the Cater Gallery. And the reason why this one was so important, one thing, for instance, was the fact that Marva left town, and I had made a suggestion about doing a catalog that was very different from a regular book type catalog. And she's like, okay, run with it, you know, and she hooked me up with some other sisters from Chicago State who did printmaking and computer work to start the process. So it's a very different catalog with each person has a card with their information and all of that. The second thing when it came to the Literary Impulse was a piece of work that I was working on. It was one of my pieces that I worked with plaster, and you know, I just couldn't get it done. I was trying to get it ready for the show. And as I said before, I always think in terms of how the energy works through me, but that was just what I thought and I felt. But this particular incident proved it to me that I had been right all along. I work in my studio generally at night. And I was in my studio. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I was trying to get this piece ready for the Literary Impulse. And I just could not, it just wasn't there. I couldn't make it work. So I turned off the light in my studio. Then I went to another part of the basement and I turned off the light. And in an instant, I was no longer physically tired. And in my head, I knew exactly what I needed to do to complete that piece. It was called Zora's Fire. And it was after, of course, Zora Neale Hurston, whose work I just loved and who basically left here without a lot of recognition. She's now, many years after she's made her transition, getting some recognition for her work. So that was a moment for me when I realized what I'd always thought was really true. I am just the vessel by which the energy comes through, which makes the work. As I said before, I was very new at this. I'd been to school, I'd learned how to draw better, how to paint better. I couldn't even say at the time that I was good. My previous experience had been just doing art fairs. So Sapphire and Crystals was the first show that I had in a gallery space. So that I was just, you know, totally excited and pumped up through the whole process. And then over the years, meeting women who also, many of them had been out there long before I started putting my work out there. And, you know, there was a lot to be learned about how to make your work look more professional in terms of framing, in terms of presentation and things like that. Sapphire and Crystals has allowed me to be more professional in the presentation of my work. It has given me the opportunity to move into other areas. Like many women would come on with suggestions on, let's do a show here. I have a space here. And so that allowed me to be able to show in different places, to grow in my work. And then just in terms of most of the shows had a theme. So that process of taking an idea that someone else had and coming up with how does that work within your soul and what comes out as a result of that. Sapphire and Crystals helped me to be a better artist and a better person. I would love to see us become out there on the national and international stage, because I think we deserve it. To have so many women who, we've got a group of women, many of which held down jobs, had families, children, husbands, you know, and still were able to maintain time to work, to get the work out, to pull shows together, to get catalogs together, to put in money to get catalogs together. So I would like to see us move forward, onward, upward, not just a catalog, but a hard copy, a hardcover book I'd like to see happen. And I've been doing some writing. I can't say that I'm the best, because there are a whole lot of women in this group who are better writers, but working together and pulling all the information together to have a book on sapphire and crystals, and to have our work travel across the country and around the world. I've never heard of any other group of women who has come together in the way that we have. And not only that, who has stayed together. I mean, we've had over the years women who have come on board and participated in a few shows and then gone other places. We have had women to make their transitions. We're talking about 31 years of keeping a connection alive and being able to, even if there's a break in the time that we have a show, we just come back together naturally, and it begins to click all over again. And I haven't seen anything in this city that has operated like that in an artistic way now. There are women's organizations and groups that do various things, but none like Sapphire and Crystals. Initially, we were thinking in terms of sapphire as the gem. However, when Marv and I were working on putting together the first catalog, and it was a photocopied catalog, and we were at another meeting with another group, and we were part of another group, and it was a mixed group. And so we're sitting here at the meeting, and we're putting together, because time was of the essence. We're putting together this catalog, and so some of the guys, kind of insulted. You all are doing a women's show? How could you all exclude us? So they started calling us sapphires, going back to the Amos and Andy sapphire. Okay, so we decided, okay, we can be sapphires, because we saw it not as a negative thing. We saw it as a positive thing, because Sapphire was a strong black woman who was opinionated and would not let anybody push her back or put her down. So we said, hey, we'll be sapphires, because we are gems in our own right. I am a former educator. I worked in Chicago public schools for 29 years. And one of the things, when it came to art, most people in the educational system, at least citywide, don't see art as important. You see most of the programs going away. That's what they want to, not fund. When they get rid of a program, it's usually the art programs. So that's a trickle-down effect. It may start with administration and trickles down to kids. So they come to believe that the arts are not important. So I would say to kids, everything that has ever been created came from a vision in somebody's head before it came out into existence. And I would tell them to look around the room, every desk, every chair, everything in this room was a vision in somebody's head. That's powerful. Not only is the vision that you have in your head of what you want to create, but the vision in your head of what you want to be. And having children recognize that you can make a choice to be what you want to be. You just have to decide what that is. Try things, explore things, see what it is that makes you happy, and then go after it with everything there is in you.